Chapter E. Demon Fetuses. On the day I was born, 19 thunderbolts fell around my yard, and none of them landed on the roof of my house. Only the 19th thunder struck the old elm tree in my yard, and for a moment, black smoke billowed, visible throughout the entire village. Some people also say that on the day I was born, there was an old hunter who was taking shelter from the rain. In a cave in the back mountain, she found a peerless beauty with 8 tails, pale and seemingly dying. When she saw the old hunter, she asked if there was a family named Wu in Jiushang village who wanted to have a child. The old hunter was frightened and instinctively nodded, afraid to move. The beautiful woman, who looked like a fairy, sighed and said, "I owe you something from a previous life. It seems I need to pay it back." After speaking, there was thunder outside, and the woman suddenly closed her eyes and fell to the ground without moving. When the old hunter summoned someone to search for the woman's body in the cave, he found that it had disappeared. At the same time, I was born, and when the midwife saw me at first glance, she let out a startled scream and almost threw me out. Just born, I have a very strange appearance, with a pointed chin and a head that looks like a fox. Moreover, as soon as I was born, my mouth grew fine fangs and there was a thin layer of white hair on my body. The vast majority of newly born children cry, but I don't. I just look hungry. When my mother was breastfeeding, I took a bite and sucked out all the blood. The painful mother pushed me away, filled me with deep fear of the newborn. The midwife said that he has worked as a midwife for a lifetime, and at least half of the people from 10 miles and 8 villages have been delivered by him. However, he has never seen such a strange newborn like me, and I am afraid he has given birth to a demon fetus. Such a strange creature cannot be left behind, and he advised my father to throw me into a mass grave to fend for himself. Otherwise it would bring disaster to the family. My father also knows that I was born strange, but after all, it was my first child, my own flesh and blood. Where did I come from? He couldn't make such a big decision, so he brought my grandfather to come up with ideas. My grandmother passed away early, and my grandfather was the backbone of my family. My father is very filial and always listens to my grandfather's words. When my grandfather saw my appearance, he was also very scared, calling out for wrongdoing and saying that he had lost some virtue in his previous life, which led to the birth of such a strange person in the old Wu family. But when he said he wanted to throw me into a mass grave and live and die on his own, my grandfather was not willing to accept it. For him, even if I were any stranger, I was still his own grandson. After careful consideration, my grandfather suddenly had an idea. He said that the child was full of strange things. When he was born, 19 thunderbolts fell from the sky and exploded around the door of the house. Finally, the last thunderbolt fell on the yard and struck the old elm tree at home. There must be something to say about this matter. He asked my father to go to Balwa and invite a Mr. Yin and Yang named Wu Banxian to come over and help him decide what was going on with the child. My father went to Bali-Wa overnight and walked dozens of kilometers on foot. After arriving at Bali-Wa, it was already done. Tell Wu Banxian that he was also amazed and immediately followed my father back to the village. When they arrived at their doorstep, they immediately saw a very strange scene. I don't know when, suddenly a lot of yellow skin and foxes appeared at the doorstep, densely packed, at least a few hundred, and I don't know where they came from. These yellow skins and foxes have surrounded our yard with water, making us scream incessantly. This incident attracted many villagers to watch, but no one dared to approach. There are also people who argue that my family has given birth to a strange creature, which offended Huangpizi and fox spirits, and sooner or later, our family will suffer and perish. My father immediately panicked when he saw this situation. He picked up a thick wooden stick from the ground and was about to drive away these animals. However, he was caught by Wu Banxian. He squinted his eyes at these animals and said to my father, "Don't go there. They have no malice." After saying this, the yellow skin and foxes, all of whom were called a group, knelt down like humans, bowed 3 times in the direction of my house, and quickly left. These animals come and go quickly, and soon they disappear. My father was amazed to see this scene and asked Wu Banxian what the situation was. Wu Banxian's face looked very serious, and he didn't answer my father's words. He just said to go and see the child first. When he arrived at the house, Grandpa picked up the child. Wu Banxian only glanced at it and took a deep breath of air, his eyes shining brightly. Then, he asked about my birthday. Subsequently, Wu Banxian began to calculate, and after a while, he excitedly said, "This child is really a demon. Leaving behind is a recipe for disaster, and the consequences are endless. He only eats blood and cannot eat ordinary things. Even if he stays behind, you will definitely not be able to raise him. He will eventually die." As soon as this statement was uttered, the whole family became panicked. My father's legs softened and he almost knelt down for the Wu Banxian, saying, "Mr. Wu, find a way. It's a piece of meat that fell off my wife's body, so I can't just watch him die. Mr. Wu, isn't there any way to keep him alive?" My grandfather also said excitedly, "Do you know why when this child was born, there were 19 thunderbolts thundering around your yard?" asked Wu Banxian without answering. Where did they know? The 2 of them shook their heads one after another. Then Wu Banxian followed the shortcut. Just now, the old man pinched his fingers and calculated that the child had been taken away by a demon for his soul. The demon had a high moral character and was about to cross the plunder and transform into a human form, but he was punished by heaven. He was afraid that his soul would fly and annihilate him. After all, the demon's transformation into a spirit was done against the sky, and he would surely summon punishment from heaven. At this moment, when your child was born, the demon did not want to be destroyed by the sky's thunder, so he landed his divine soul on the child. In this way, the thunder would not come that day, it will fall on this monster. After all, your child is innocent, and those 19 heavenly thunder only exploded in a circle around your house, without harming anyone. The yellow skin and foxes that just cut out at the entrance of your yard are the best proof. I'm afraid the demon that fell on your child may be a demon fox that has become a climate. Those yellow skin and foxes are his relatives, friends, and descendants." Upon hearing this, my father almost burst into tears and quickly said, "Mr. Wu, what should I do?" Wu Banxian sighed and said helplessly, "This is the first time I have seen this situation. Even if this child can survive in the future, it will be full of disasters and misfortunes. Judging from his fate, there is a great deal of fire in the sky. Before the fire and water are replenished, the fire and thunder will devour and gnaw. If he is separated from fire, it is a sign of disaster. On average, there will be a major disaster in 3 years, and when he is robbed, he will be injured. Either he will die or someone else will die. There will be at least 18 disasters in his life. I have a way to save his life, which is to become my disciple and follow the path of the dark door. However, committing 5 flaws and 3 flaws in one life is better than dying. However, in this way, I'm afraid he won't be able to see you again in the future." But no one expected that this Wu Banxian was my first person to be robbed. As soon as he held me out of the village, he suddenly died, bleeding from his 7 orifices. Chapter 2 White Fox Delivers Rice. This Wu Banxian said that I should be robbed and cannot survive in our family. I must be his disciple in order to have a chance of survival. He also said that even if he practiced the shaman technique with him, it would be difficult to overcome the 3 calamities. That is to say, when I was 9 years old, the calamities I encountered were the most severe. If I couldn't overcome these calamities, I would die. If it did, there would be a great turning point. Grandpa discussed with his father and thought that living was better than dying, at least with a thought, so he agreed. As a result, Wu Banxian took me directly from home and left in a very hurry, afraid that my family would turn back. Shortly after leaving the village, someone discovered the body of Wu Banxian, with a terrifying death. His 7 orifices were bleeding, his eyes widened, and his face was filled with fear, as if he had been scared to death alive. But I was fine, lying next to Wu Banxian, neither crying nor making noise. Upon hearing this, my parents had no choice but to bring me back. Wu Banxian's family also came over and caused a big uproar. It was not our family's fault for this. Wu Banxian died on the road himself, but he still paid their family a sum of money. The already poor family is now adding insult to injury. Later on, I heard from my master that the reason why Wu Banxian died was because of his ulterior motives. When he took me away, he was greedy for something on me and even wanted my life. These are just later remarks and will not be mentioned for the time being. After being carried home by my father, I began to worry again. I don't know if what Wu Banxian said before was true or false. Wu Banxian's sudden and violent death made my family feel a bit afraid of me again. Even the people in the village say that I am a bereaved star who killed an innocent person from birth. And my rations have also become a problem. I don't drink milk at all, only blood. From birth until now, I haven't eaten a single bite and have been starving and crying loudly. Grandpa and father were worried about tea and food, while mother was also sad and silently shed tears alone. Unexpectedly, when my father was going out to the thatched cottage in the middle of the night, he suddenly heard a rustling sound in the yard. Looking down at the sound, he suddenly saw several white-haired foxes appearing in the yard, followed by a few yellow skins. In the darkness, the eyes of those few beasts shone brightly, and they moved stealthily. One of the big white-haired foxes even lay on the windowsill and secretly looked into the room. When my father saw this scene, he was initially afraid, but then he became a bit angry. He thought to himself that having a strange baby at home was already enough to cause trouble. These animals also came to cause trouble, so he picked up a brick from the ground and threw it towards those animals. The brick hit the white-haired fox lying on the windowsill, and the painful white-haired fox let out a scream that sounded very mournful in the quiet night. It turned around and gave my father a fierce look, showing its sharp teeth, which scared him not to move at that time. At this moment, the door suddenly opened, and my grandfather rushed out with a large machete. Although he was almost 70 years old, the old man's body was still very strong. He had served in the army and fought against the devils when he was young, and he was once the captain of the big sword team. His eyes were wide open, full of murderous energy, and the knife in his hand shone brightly. As soon as those animals saw my grandfather, they were scared and ran out of the yard. "What's going on?" Grandpa looked at his father and said, "I saw these animals wandering in the yard, and there was a white-haired fox lying on the window looking into the house," said the father with lingering fear. "It's true that misfortune never comes singly. I, old Wu, have accumulated virtue and done good deeds throughout my life to protect my family and country. I have never committed any wrongdoing. As I get older, how could I have been involved in such a difficult task?" Grandpa sighed helplessly. At this moment, he turned his head and suddenly saw a dark object outside the door, as if it was still moving. Crouching down to take a look, he immediately wondered, where did these things come from? My father also leaned over to take a look and was momentarily stunned. But on the side of our house entrance, there were actually several chubby rabbits, already on the verge of death. Pick up the rabbit and take a look, and there are several bloody holes on its neck, as if bitten out by some wild animal. Dad, these few wild rabbits were not sent by those foxes and yellow skins, were they? My father said somewhat strangely. Grandpa nodded calmly and said, "It's very likely they are. During the day, hundreds of yellow-skinned and foxes kneel before our house, and we don't know what connection our children have with these animals. Since they're here, we'll keep them and let the blood go for the children, and we'll eat meat." With this rabbit blood, I finally had enough to feed myself, fell asleep, and my family also had a meat meal. But what surprised the family was that these foxes and yellow skins were not only given once. From then on, they came to my house almost every night to hang out. Every time they came, they would always leave something behind, sometimes wild chickens and rabbits, sometimes 2 fish, and even 2 meals a day. Alright, my family eats meat every day. In that era, the standard of living was much better than other families. Generally, people only eat meat during holidays. My family eats meat every day, and sometimes they can't even eat it. My father even sells it at the market, which made many people in the village drool with envy. When my father saw these yellow skins and foxes again in the yard, he no longer had the intention of driving them away. Seeing them was also seen as not seeing them. Sometimes he had no choice but to walk in the opposite direction, and those beasts were not afraid of my father. They flickered past my father with wild animals in their mouths, put them down and laughed without looking back. Very handsome. In a blink of an eye, 3 years passed, and these foxes and weasels brought some wild animals over every day. My family ate meat and drank blood. Due to the good life, my parents have gained a lot of weight. Gradually, as I grew up, apart from the problem of drinking blood, everything else was no different from your normal child. My family has also tried to give me some other food, but every time I eat it, I spit it out and can't swallow it at all. When she was first born, she had white hair on her body and a face similar to that of a fox. However, as she grew older and her white hair faded away, her face gradually became more normal and delicate as she grew older. However, when I reached the age of 3, my grandfather and father began to worry again. They still remember Wu Bangxian's words, "I was born to be robbed every 3 years, and now I happen to be 3 years old, and I don't know what kind of calamity I will encounter." On the day of my 3rd birthday, it was really a disaster. A person died in the village, and everyone in the village said it was me who caused the death. Chapter 3: A bowl of wild chicken blood. The year I was 3 years old, it was a severe drought. On my 3rd birthday, almost all the adults in the village went to water the fields, and my family was the same, leaving me alone at home. My family left me a bowl of wild chicken blood and made me drink it myself when I was hungry. Although I am only 3 years old, I am smarter and more obedient than ordinary children, playing alone in the yard. In the past few years, it has always been me, and no children are willing to play with me. The main reason is that the adults at home do not allow me, saying that I am a born monster. The people in the village also know that I never eat, only drink blood. Moreover, every night, Guan Pizzi and foxes come to my house to deliver things, and everyone avoids me like snakes and scorpions. On my birthday, as usual, I was playing alone in the yard. While I was urinating and watering the ant colony, I suddenly heard the sound of children playing outside the yard, which immediately attracted me. In the past 3 years, I have rarely left this courtyard. After all, the people in the village dislike me and everyone will hide from me when they see me. But I really wish I had a playmate, even if a child had a word with me. Upon hearing the noise outside the courtyard, I ran to the entrance and looked out through the crack in the door. In front of my yard, there is a small sand dune that my neighbor next door plans to build a house and horse. There are 4 or 5 children playing with sand on the dune, talking and laughing, making my heart ache to see it. At that time, I was only 3 years old and didn't think too much, so I ran over and wanted to play with those few children. But as soon as the child saw me, he immediately showed a frightened expression. An older child pointed at me and said, "Here comes the monster who drinks blood. Whoever talks to him will have bad luck." With this loud shout, the children playing in the sand suddenly ran out of sight, leaving me standing alone there. These children run very fast, and all the things that play with the sand are left on the sand dunes. Watching them run away, I feel quite disappointed, but it's okay. I'll play on my own after they run away. I picked up a tool to play with the sand and squatted on the sand dune to start playing on my own. Just then, suddenly, a voice came from the other side of the dune. "Shall we play with the sand together?" I looked up and saw a chubby little child, about my age, with 2 large strands of snot hanging from his nose, dressed quite cleanly. I smiled at him and said, "Okay, let's play together and build a big house together." Everyone ran away, leaving only this little chubby guy, who is about the same age as me and is at an age of fear. We both had a great time sitting on the sand dune, pursing our open crotch pants and playing with the sand. After a while, the little chubby man suddenly took out a piece of candy from his body and handed it to me, saying, "Sugar, sweet." I haven't eaten sugar because I haven't eaten anything except blood, but I still took it and put it in my mouth, and didn't taste anything. At that time, I ate the little fat man's candy and thought he was good to me. I should also be good to him. While I was eating the candy, I said to him, "I also have delicious food. I'll get it for you. You wait." As I spoke, I ran into the house and brought out the bowl of pheasant blood that my parents had left for me. The little chubby man didn't know what it was, so I showed him to drink. Taking a sip, his mouth turned red. The little chubby man chuckled, and I followed suit. He also picked up a bowl to drink, but just took a sip. The bowl didn't hold steady, and the bowl of blood spilled all over his body. This is my ration, and seeing it all spilled makes me feel heartbroken. Just as I didn't know what to do, suddenly a hysterical wail came from behind me. "You freak, damn it! How dare you harm my son?" A wicked woman suddenly ran over and without saying a word, just picked up my collar and threw me far away, hitting the ground fiercely. At that time, I was in great pain and cried loudly on the ground. As I was crying, I suddenly saw a few pairs of green eyes not far away looking at me, while also staring at the wicked woman. The wicked woman picked up the little chubby man and looked up and down in pain, only to find that there was no injury, only blood spilled on him. However, the wicked woman still couldn't help but ran to me, who was crying loudly, and kicked me 2 more times. "You damn little beast, you dared to feed my son to drink blood. I'll see if I don't kill you." A 3-year-old child was kicked far away with just one kick, and it hurt so much that I couldn't even cry. Fortunately, at this moment, my grandfather came back with a hoe and saw that the wicked woman was still beating me. He immediately rushed over and pushed the wicked woman away, angrily saying, "The third wife, why are you beating my grandson? How dare you ask? What did this monster do? He even fed my son blood. If he eats it badly, I will make your old Wu family resist." The wicked woman crossed her waist and was furious. Grandpa picked me up from the ground and saw me crying into tears, which made me feel heartbroken. I went to see the little chubby man again and was immediately startled. The little chubby man spilled a bowl of blood all over his body, bloody and looking very scary. I'm fine after drinking this blood, but ordinary children will definitely have problems if they drink it. My grandfather knows he's doing it wrong and can't say anything. After apologizing repeatedly, he carried me back home. But the wicked woman still refused to let go, standing at my doorstep and cursing loudly, attracting many neighbors to watch. When I was picked up by my grandfather, I could still see some green eyes hiding in the grass staring at me, while also staring at the wicked woman. "Miss, didn't you stay at home well? Why did you run out for?" Grandpa let me down. Xiao Jie is my nickname, and my real name is Wu Jie. Wu Banxian said that I am a person who should be robbed, and there will be 18 robberies in my life, so my grandfather gave me this name. Play. I want to play with them. He gave me candy to eat, and I gave him delicious food. I sobbed and said. Upon hearing this, Grandpa couldn't help but let out a long sigh, but he was also helpless. Children have a natural disposition to think that giving their most precious things to children is good, and there are no bad intentions. After my parents came back, they heard about this matter and gave me a hard lesson, saying they would never let me go out again. Everyone in the family thought this was over, but it was actually just the beginning. Because the next morning, someone found the body of the third daughter-in-law in the back mountain, and the death was very tragic. The body was bitten by some wild animal, with numerous wounds and scars on it. There was not a good piece of meat on all sides of the body, especially one of the feet, and only a bone was left. And the foot that was chewed on was the one that kicked me back then. Chapter 2: Coffin Landing. The death of Ma Lao San's wife was very strange. Later, according to Ma Lao San, she and her child were still sleeping well that day. In the middle of the night, she heard some noise in the yard. However, after working all day on the farm, she was so tired that she couldn't even open her eyes. It seemed that someone was calling her wife's name, and he didn't know if he was sleeping soundly. Not long after, Ma Lao San's wife suddenly got up from the bed, and the sleepy Ma Lao San asked what she was doing. Ma Lao San's wife did not respond. Ma Lao San thought she was going to the thatched cottage, so he didn't ask much and went straight to sleep. However, the next day he woke up and found his wife not in bed, nowhere to be found. So he called on several neighbors to look for her, and the whole village searched everywhere, but couldn't find anyone. In the end, he mobilized the whole village to search for her body, but her body was found in the back mountain. When the public saw the body of Ma Lao San's wife, they were too scared to approach for a moment. The people in the village have never seen a person die so tragically. They have been bitten by something and are all covered in blood. One foot has been bitten, leaving only a white bone. The most terrifying thing is that Ma Lao San's wife's mouth is still wearing a strange smile and her eyes are still open. The death was so tragic that one could still laugh, which made people shudder to think about it. Ma Lao San was crying profusely, and the village helped him collect the body and put it at home. According to the tradition of Jiushang village, corpses need to be parked at home for 3 days before being buried. In recent days, people have been coming to mourn one after another. They are all neighbors from the same village, looking down but not looking up. My father also bought some paper money and went to offer condolences to Ma Lao San's wife. But while burning paper in the brazier in front of Ma Lao San's coffin, a strange thing happened. Everyone else was burning paper well, and in a short while, it was burned clean, leaving only a pile of ashes. However, when my father threw the yellow paper he bought into the brazier, he was stunned and couldn't burn it. He poured high alcohol on top, only burned a small part of it, and quickly extinguished it. I don't know where a strange wind came from, and the paper dust from the brazier blew out of the basin, leaving my father with a disheveled face. This paper cannot be burned, so let's put on 3 sticks of incense. However, shortly after the incense was ignited, 2 sticks of incense broke off. The middle stick was intact, but the 2 sticks of incense were broken from the middle. This is the so-called 3 long and 2 short. At the sight of the situation, everyone around them turned pale and burned incense like this, indicating that the deceased was angry with the person who came to apply the incense. The incense and paper money burned by the other party will not be charged. My father was also very scared and rushed home alone, telling my grandfather about it. Grandpa sighed and knew it was not easy. Actually, when people think about it, the death of Ma Lao San's wife is closely related to me. Because I gave his son champagne blood to drink, Ma Lao San's wife beat me up and something happened at night. At that time, Wu Banxian said that I have a misfortune every 3 years. Either I die or someone else dies. Now that Ma Lao San's wife has died, it is precisely because of my misfortune. Moreover, the large and small wounds on Ma Lao San's wife's body were clearly gnawed by wild animals. Looking at the tooth marks, it looks like they were bitten out by yellow skin and a fox. The whole village knows that on the day I was born, hundreds of yellow skin and foxes gathered around my house to worship, and every day, yellow skin and foxes brought game to my house. Now people in the village are starting to argue that I killed Ma Lao San's wife. At first, the people in the village were only skeptical. But the next day, this matter was confirmed. Because on the evening when my father mourned for Ma Lao San's wife, my whole family had a terrible dream, except for me. In the dream, Ma Lao San's wife came to my house. He stood on tiptoe with 1 foot covered in white bones and a malicious smile on his lips. He told my family that I had killed her and wanted me to defend her life. He also wanted my family to kill me. Otherwise, we would have to be buried with the entire Wu family. That night, Ma Lao San also had a dream. He dreamed that his wife had come back and cried in front of him, saying that I had killed her and asked Ma Lao San to kill me. Only in this way can she live with peace of mind and go for reincarnation. Early in the morning, Ma Lao San found my house and looked at me with a murderous expression. He wanted to argue with my house and was still holding a firewood cutter in his hand. My parents were very flustered and didn't know what to do. In the end, my grandfather stepped forward and pushed me out. With a cold face, he said to Ma Lao San, "If you really feel that this child has harmed your wife, you can kill him to save her life. You have to have the courage and take action now." Ma Lao San dares not really take action. If he really kills me, he may also be shot, and in the end, he can only live in a disheartened manner. The coffin has been parked at Ma Lao San's house for 3 days, and finally it is about to be buried. On the day of burial, the whole day was gray and there was no wind at all. Several young men were found in the village to carry the coffin, but it was only carried to the doorstep, and the rope for carrying the coffin suddenly broke. This is a great omen. There is a saying in the village that after the coffin leaves the house, it cannot fall to the ground until the cemetery. However, just as it leaves the house, the rope of the coffin breaks and the coffin falls heavily to the ground. This is very unlucky and there will be a big accident. As soon as Ma Lao San saw this situation, he was also very scared. He lay down on the coffin and cried bitterly, saying, "Son of a bitch, I know your grievance of death and won't leave. If you have any resentment in your heart, go find the person who harmed you, and don't mess with your family." Just as Ma Lao San was holding the coffin in his arms and crying bitterly, there suddenly came a sound behind him. Just like the day I was born, hundreds of yellow-skinned animals and foxes suddenly appeared near Ma Lao San's house. One of them is a yellow-skinned one, surprisingly large, with a layer of white fur from the top of its head to its back. This huge yellow skin, carrying hundreds of yellow skin and a fox, rushed to the front of the coffin, causing people around to retreat towards both sides in fear. Some were timid, their legs were too weak to move, and they collapsed on the ground. The yellow fur with white fur on its back came to the coffin of Ma Lao San's wife, walked around it 3 times, and extended a furry paw, patting it 3 times in a row, making a dull sound of dong-dong. Subsequently, the big yellow skin quickly left with a group of animals. As soon as these yellow skins and foxes left, the young guys carrying the coffins tried to lift them again, but this time, the coffins could be lifted. After patting the coffin 3 times with the yellow fur on its back, it was finally able to be buried smoothly. But on the second day after the burial of Ma Lao San's wife, people discovered that her tomb had been excavated and her body had disappeared. Chapter 5. 3 more days. On the night when Ma Lao San's wife was buried, the body had already broken out of the coffin, because Ma Lao San's wife had come to my house at midnight. At that time, Jiushan village was very poor, and there was no electricity in the village. Almost every household lit candles and kerosene lamps. Even so, the people in the village are not willing to give up, so they basically go to bed early. In the middle of the night, my parents were sleeping soundly when suddenly I heard a banging sound from the bedroom window, very rhythmic, 3 long and 1 short. My parents have been busy with farm work all day and are very tired. At first, when I heard this sound, I thought it was the wind or a bat hitting the window, but I didn't take it to heart. But after a while, the tapping sound was still there, and it became more and more urgent, still 3 long and 1 short. My dad got up in a daze and opened the window, wanting to see what was knocking on the window outside. Unexpectedly, as soon as the window was opened, a foul smell rushed towards me, and then I saw a swollen face covered in corpses, which was the dead third wife of Ma Lao. Ma Lao San's wife's mouth still wore the eerie smile she had when she died. At the sight of this big face, my father instantly woke up and let out a terrifying scream, and fell to the ground. The screams awakened my mother and I, who were sleeping soundly. I will never forget the terrifying face of Ma Lao San's wife, who once made me have many nightmares in my sleep. After seeing Ma Lao San's wife, my mother was so scared that she couldn't make a sound. She just hugged me tightly and trembled all over. At this moment, Ma Lao San's wife suddenly spoke up. She let out a burst of penetrating laughter and looked straight at me. There are still 4 days left. 4 days left. The father's screams woke up his grandfather, who was sleeping in the east wing room. He rushed in with a snowy knife and glanced at his father and trembling mother, who were lying on the ground. Then he followed their gaze towards the window, which made him tremble all over. After all, the old man is a veteran who has served as a soldier and killed Japanese devils. Although he is also flustered, he is much calmer than the two of them. Third daughter-in-law, I know you have resentment in your heart. It's all fate, no wonder anyone else. The old man, I advise you to leave quickly. Otherwise this big knife in my hand will be unkind to you. There are not many Japanese devils who died under this knife. And you can still be more fierce than that little one. I don't care if you have one more. As he spoke, Grandpa shook his snowy big knife blade in his hand. This big knife was left by my grandfather when he was in the army, and it was a thought. When my grandfather was free, he took it out to wipe it, and it shone brightly enough to reflect human figures. I don't know if it was because Grandpa flashed the big knife that Mao-Lao-san's wife turned around and limped away. As she walked away, she even let out a burst of penetrating laughter and said the sentence just now. There are still 4 days, 4 days. After Mao-Lao-san's wife left, the whole family was too scared to sleep. The whole family is thinking, what does that Mao-Lao-san's wife mean by saying there are still 4 days left? The next morning, an old man who was herding sheep in the village discovered that Mao-Lao-san's wife's new grave had been dug up. However, when Mao-Lao-san personally went to see it, everyone looked carefully and found that the grave did not seem to have been dug up because the soil had been overturned, and the coffin boards were scattered around, all broken. It looked like the third wife had crawled out of the grave herself. Just thinking about this kind of scene makes people feel shivery. In the middle of the night, the grave of Mao-Lao-san's wife suddenly cracked open. Mao-Lao-san's wife, who had been dead for 3 days, crawled out of the grave and walked leisurely towards the direction of the Lao Wu family, knocking on their windows. However, Mao-Lao-san didn't know that his daughter-in-law had gone to my house in the middle of the night. Grandpa and father didn't speak out about this matter, and the relationship with Mao-Lao-san's family had already been very strained. Now, our family doesn't want to have any extracurricular activities. Mao-Lao-san only thought that his daughter-in-law's body had been stolen. That month, there were many robbers, especially young female corpses, who were the most popular. The specific reason was that there were many uses, and the most common one was to engage in infidelity. Although Mao-Lao-san's wife may not be considered good-looking, she is very young, not yet 30 years old, so she is very popular. If someone stole the body, that would be great, but unfortunately it didn't happen because the next night, he ran to my house again. Last night, Mao-Lao-san's wife ran to my house and knocked on the window, which scared my mother not to sleep. My father also comforted my mother not to be afraid, saying that the body of Mao-Lao-san's wife had been stolen. My mother was scared and asked my grandfather to sleep in the main room. Whenever she heard anything, she asked my grandfather to come over with a knife. I worked on the farm all day during the day, and although I was afraid, my parents still went to bed early. Unexpectedly, in the middle of the night, the two of them were sleeping soundly, but were still woken up by the sound of knocking on the window. Upon hearing this commotion, my father immediately became mentally alert and sat up fiercely from the bed. Through the bright moonlight outside the window, he saw a dark figure standing outside, rhythmically tapping on the window. My mother was already scared and crying, holding me in her arms and trembling under the blanket. "Dad, here we go again." My dad was holding a stick in his hand and didn't dare to get out of bed, just guarding his wife and children behind him. If we were to say that our grandfather, who had killed the little devils before, rushed in upon hearing the commotion, still holding the snowy machete in his hand. Seeing the figure standing outside the window, the swollen face was clearly visible. "Third wife, you're really not finished, are you?" "Old man, at my age, I've already lived enough. If you have the ability, kill me. When I turn into a ghost, you won't be able to get through it." As he spoke, Grandpa directly used his big knife to poke open the window. Outside the window stood Malo-san's wife, with a strange smile on her lips and pale eyes. She said in a very sharp voice, "There are 3 more days. There are 3 more days, hee hee." Rao Shu's grandfather was bold and couldn't help but take a cold breath when he saw the terrifying appearance of the 3rd wife of Malo. Fortunately, after Malo-san's wife finished speaking this sentence, she tiptoed towards the direction of the door on the foot with only white bones left, and disappeared in a short while. "Dad," Malo-san's wife said yesterday that there are still 4 days left, and today that there are still 3 days left. Is it possible that in 3 days, our whole family will be killed by her? My father suddenly thought of something and said in fear,